Welcome to Citizens for Community Media. We have Gus Zuehlke here again tonight. People have seen him many times. My name's Peter Helland, and actually this show could be called Israel, but what we're going to talk about is the Iran crisis and our response, and it's really a community discussion, okay? Because the truth is, you may have sons that are going to be over there fighting or are over there. And so we want to look at the issue. But as far as this community here in South Bend, we're represented by Jackie Walorski. And she grew up in one of the real big mega church here. It was Lester Summerall's church. I think he had 12 TV stations, 5 shortwave. And now, in fact, right now, the grandsons are fighting it out as far as who's going to own the thing. And then after growing up there, she went to Jerry Falwell's college, Liberty, and Pastor Summerall was Assembly of God, and Assemblies of God completely adopted Schofield's theology, C.I. Scofield, okay, and most all the Baptists adopted C.I. Scofield. So she would have had pure Christian Zionism in both places. One would be just speaking in tongues and one wouldn't, basically. Okay? And that's just Jackie Walorski. This summer, I always go to the Friends of Israel conference at Winona Lake, 50 miles away, Warsaw, Indiana. That's Grace College. Grace College was started by Alva McLean. He was on the editorial board for the Scofield Reference Bible that came out in 1967. So why do I go? Well, they're an outreach to all the Jewish people who are unsaved. A lot of them are former Jews who became saved. I totally agree with that mission. I don't agree with their Christian Zionism.
Okay.
But I like to keep up. And many years ago, I went to one conference, and I've told you this. And on Tuesday night, it goes Monday through Friday. On Tuesday night, they have somebody from Israel give the talk. And they had one time Carolyn Glick, and apparently she lives not far from here, and she lives in Israel, and she's like one of the main women spokesmen for Israel. And if I remember right, she was saying the only solution right now is that we're going to have to bomb Iran. That's the only solution that she saw, and I can't remember. I get confused on the one-state solution, two-state solution, but I think she sided with Netanyahu. But that's what's behind this. I think the Likud party is not afraid to bomb Iran to save what they believe is Israel. That's what I think is at the bottom. So let's open up with a scripture, lay it out, and then I want to hear what what's on your heart. So James chapter 4 or chapter 3 is, I think it was better to start there. It talks about wisdom. If there's any wise or learned men among you, this is New Jerusalem, let them show it by their good lives with humility and wisdom in their actions. But if at heart you have the bitterness of jealousy or a self-seeking ambition, never make any claims for yourself or cover up the truth with lies. Principles of this kind are not the wisdom that comes down from above. They are only earthly, animal, and devilish. Wherever you find jealousy and ambition, you find disharmony and wicked things of every kind being done. Whereas the wisdom that comes down from above is essentially something pure. It also makes for peace and is kindly and considerate. It is full of compassion and shows itself by doing good. Nor is there any trace of partiality or hypocrisy in it. Peacemakers, when they work for peace, sow the seeds which will bear fruit in holiness. Now then the next verses talk about war. Okay, and this is what we're facing, that wars can come about easily. Okay? So chapter 4 of James says, where do these wars and battles between yourselves first start? Isn't it precisely in the desires fighting inside your own selves? You want something and you haven't got it, so you are prepared to kill. You have an ambition that you cannot satisfy, so you fight to get your way by force. Why don't you have what you want is because you don't pray for it. And when you do pray and don't get it, it is because you have not prayed properly. You have prayed for something to indulge your own desires. I mean, James is all one package. I mean, so you almost have to read the whole book, but that's giving us a little guidance here.
Right. So we can talk about peace in two different ways, right? We can start with the peace of soul, or peace of heart, mind, and soul and strength, according to the commandment to love God, lining up the person. Or we can talk about peace in the political realm, okay? What's interesting, of course, is that if you look at like the Platonic ideal, it starts in the soul, but then if you have an ordered soul, the order that's in the soul can be spread to the body politic, see? So
is that fitting where it says judgment begins in the house of the Lord first?
Well, yeah, if you have a group of believers together, then they need to evaluate how they're doing in the way they're following peace, following the Lord's peace, before they go out and start judging everybody else. I mean, it really does start with our choices, to live the Christian life, to love.
And the world does not trust the church, perhaps as much as it has in the past, because the number of abortions in the church are close to what the number of abortions are in the world. Right? I mean, people do not see the huge difference that there used to be there.
Yeah, there's a lot of confusion and in the church. We got that. Okay, so we have to kind of sort through it. I mean, one of the people that really inspires me as far as sorting through confusion is St. Augustine in his book, The Confessions. And as I've been reading them again in preparation for doing some of these encounters on peace, I realized that Augustine was emphasizing the struggle of finding the right way, because things seemed to be a certain way, but they were actually different. So he was struggling with the problem of seeming and being.
No, your dad probably read Confessions at Notre Dame, right?
I'm assuming he did.
I think my dad had that book. Okay, just so people know.
Yeah,
your background here.
If you're an arts and letters student at Notre Dame, you read the Confessions at least once. If you're a theology major like I was, I read the Confessions, I think, 5 times in different classes at Notre Dame. And then I had the delight to do it with a book discussion group later on as an adult. And that was good too. Including, I actually spent part of that book discussion group talking it over with Gerhard Niemeyer, the great scholar at Notre Dame, the great German political thinker, and he gave a great read on the Confessions.
But a lot of what you're bringing to the table is my dad was an officer, Navy pilot, lieutenant in World War II, but he didn't see any action because they were about to invade Japan supposedly, and they had the atomic bomb. So supposedly that saved him. But your dad was in the thick of the war. Right, and our dads both graduated in 1943. So your dad jumped right in, and there's a whole history there that fuels your concern, even for the Middle East. Right? I mean, you have a background of U.S. policy.
Yes, I mean a kind of interesting background, I guess.
I'm talking about the American First movement.
I was going to.
Explain your background as to why you have an advantage to kind of view this.
Well, yeah, it was an ongoing discussion of history that went on in my family. And I found out more about it as I read things about the history of World War II and discussed them with my father.
But even World War I laid out the Middle East.
Right.
And who was your grandfather's friend?
My grandfather's friend was Senator Gerald Nye from
North Dakota. But he grew up
He grew up in Hortonville, Wisconsin, with my grandfather.
Near Appleton.
Which is near Appleton,
Yeah.
about 16 miles away. It's a farm little village.
Yeah.
And so Senator Nye and my grandfather were friends. And Senator Nye was one of the great leaders of the America First movement. Okay? Now, the people don't, there's sort of a skewed history of the America First movement.
But the initial idea was
Right.
that, and you know it better than me, is there was some doubts as to the validity of our involvement in World War I.
There was, and
even within Congress.
Right, and Gerald Nye led a committee because there were no munitions factories in his area of the country.
So he wasn't motivated by love of money.
Right, he didn't have the problem of the
conflict of interest.
Of conflict of interest. So he did a series of hearings on how the munitions companies pushed World War I as a cause.
Because basically we're almost half German, the country. Back then the United States was half German or something, 3/8. So we were, before World War I, in a way we were pro-German. And all of a sudden there was some mystery as to how we just jumped into that war. Wasn't that part of it?
You know what? I don't know enough about the geopolitical details of the motivations of Gerald Nye, but what I do know is how my father described him. And then when I was a young boy, he took me to Washington, D.C., and I met Gerald Nye in the last year of his life. He was in bed. He was bedridden.
Your dad took you to see him.
And my dad, but he was still completely alert and everything. And my dad took me to see him, and then his wife took me down in the basement and showed me all the political cartoons about the debates of the America First movement and all the pictures of Nye in the political cartoons and so on.
But the American First movement was a movement that was reflecting on our involvement in World War I.
Correct.
And that reflection led them to believe that war was problematic.
Absolutely. They saw that involvement as problematic, and they pushed for us to stay out of the European theater.
We didn't benefit by World War I. The munitions people benefited. They made a lot of money. But the average person living in Wisconsin didn't benefit.
Right. So I guess I need to tell the rest of the story about my father.
Well, the Middle East itself has been determined somewhat by what happened in World War I.
No, that's true. Obviously, the part of the division up of the Middle East occurred because of the defeat of the Ottoman Empire. And then after World War I, they divided it up by the European powers, right?
Yeah.
Between France and Britain, right? And so, and then there was the Balfour Declaration that was written by the British Secretary Balfour to Mr. Rothschild, declaring the intentions of His Majesty's government to support the movement of Jewish people back to the Holy Land. Right?
Yeah, and you have Benjamin Friedman's kind of well known for people that follow this speech at Willard Hotel, and so there's a lot of mystery, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions about causes and secondary causes in history and different views of what happened there. And I'm not I don't consider myself competent enough to comment on that. I'm a religion teacher.
Right, but we're dealing with the Christian Zionism being a strong motivator for Americans to support Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And Christian Zionism got its main push by the Balfour Declaration.
Okay.
Okay, and America getting into the war and helping Britain win,
Mm-hmm.
helping them secure that Palestine.
Okay.
Okay, so
there are causes that go even back into even before World War One, right? I mean, but
well, if you leave it out, how are we going to assess what we're doing with Iran adequately? Isn't there some truth to that?
Right. I guess it depends how far back you want to go.
Well, you want to go back enough so you can see the big picture.
All right.
You know, is there a big picture with Iran that if we don't understand it?
Yeah, I prefer, as far as Iran goes, I don't know. I tend to think that what the American government did in 1953 with
Mogadishu.
Iran, overthrowing the democratically elected government of Mohammad Mossadegh, when he was elected and he had the mandate of his people to go ahead and nationalize the oil industry in Iran, and somehow some of the folks in our CIA didn't like that, and so they overthrew him. And so there was bad blood with Iran ever since then.
But there's no World War I connection there, right?
Except that it was the British holdings of the petroleum there that was at least part of the ostensible reason for our involvement. We were kind of coming to the aid of our old World War II ally.
Okay, so
yeah, that's what I think.
they got those holdings from winning World War I.
I would assume, yes, I would assume
From
so.
the Ottomans.
Right.
So they weren't all so happy with that, were they?
I would think not.
So really their revenge or their gut feelings could go back to World War I and being conquered by the British.
Sure. And it was determined.
Was it achieved by us coming into the war? Well, if we hadn't come into the war, would Britain? Benjamin Franklin says no way.
Okay. Well,
So I'm just saying this is the title of the show is the Iran crisis and our response.
Okay.
So we did respond in World War I,
Right.
supposedly by some trickery, and that was what Nye's committee was looking at.
Nye's committee was definitely looking at the trickery of the times. And then Nye the committee hearings ended fairly abruptly, apparently.
After they
in
were getting close.
1936. And then Nye went public to push the America First thing all around the country. And my father would describe to me what an orator Gerald Nye was, because he heard him. My father was part of the America First movement, of course, because his father was friends with Gerald Nye. Why wouldn't he be?
But my grandfather,
Yes.
my dad's dad, was a follower of La Follette, the progressive. So he's totally supported Roosevelt, whatever he did.
I see. Okay.
But
Okay.
in our family, we did have people that were on the speaking tour for American First in Wisconsin.
Okay.
So it was.
So you had a divided family over it, but
Well,
there was a division in the Zuehlke family, though, too, later on. After World War II started, my uncle had a war job that could not be replaced by anybody because he was a naval architect, and he had the plans for the submarines that were built in Manitowoc. And I think there was one other person, like in California, that had those plans. And those are the only two people that had the plans, if I remember this correctly. So they had to leave my uncle safe and sound in Manitowoc. And my grandfather, seeing an opportunity, talked to my uncle and got my father a job putting together what they called the Christmas tree board in those submarines. That's the control panel in those submarines. And my dad could do that work. and he was doing that work. And then, and my grandfather was breathing a sigh of relief that neither one of his boys was going to go actually see
Dangerous combat.
dangerous combat. That's right. And then my dad snuck off and rebelled and joined the Navy.
Right after Notre Dame.
No, while he was at Notre Dame.
Well, he joined the ROTC.
No, yeah, it would have been the equivalent of the ROTC. And then they shipped him off to Columbia as what they called a 90-day wonder.
Columbia University in New York.
That's where he became a naval officer. We studied there, and they mailed him his diploma from Notre Dame, 1943. And then as soon as he was trained by the Navy, he went off as the commanding officer of an landing craft tank, which is, of course, a small, about 100-foot ship that was designed to carry amphibious equipment and so on, and enable people in landings, you know. So he was the commander of that.
How many men do you think were on that ship?
LCT? Now that's a detail I should know, but don't. Okay. I mean,
okay, Kennedy was on the PT 109.
PT is a smaller boat than
Smaller
an LCT,
than that.
and they're faster. The PT 109, the famous book that Kennedy wrote. The PT boats were faster.
Okay.
The LCTs were bigger, and they were designed to bring like heavy equipment
And men
to
land.
land. Sure, LCT, landing craft tank, they called it.
Okay, but this is helpful because you've had discussions about why we got into World War II, and I was why we got into World War I. Because you've talked to your dad about Pearl Harbor and why we got into it.
Well, that was later. So the family story is almost kind of, it's very personal, but it's kind of humorous. I read a book. It's actually a book you gave me. It was paid for by the Rockefeller Foundation by Stinnett.
Day of Deceit.
And it's called Day of Deceit. And it's a study of how Pearl Harbor really happened. And the argument of Stinnett is that, and you can listen to him on YouTube if you want and discover this, but the argument of Stinnett was that this was a setup. He called it a noble lie, but basically we were lied into World War II as almost like a show almost to try to rally the country so that Roosevelt could go into Europe and fight that war against Hitler. So Stinnett justifies it, but I read that book and I couldn't believe it. And I was sitting at dinner at a restaurant with my parents, just my parents and I just sort of brought it up to my father.
Because you just got done reading the book.
I just got done reading the book, and it was fascinating to me. And my father went into a rage in the restaurant and said, Roosevelt was a Christian gentleman. He never would have done that. And he got kind of disproportionately angry at me, and I was terribly embarrassed. I was sad because when I visited my parents up in Wisconsin in those days, I just wanted them to be happy. I didn't want to bring up disturbing topics or anything. I never did that, never. And I had no idea that I'd stepped on such a nerve. Well, as it was customary, this is kind of an odd thing, but it was the way it was in my family. My dad was very slow when he walked and got up in his old age, and so he would always send people to walk ahead of him to the car. So he didn't want people hovering over him, in his old age. So my mom and I dutifully walked to the car, and so we had some time while we were waiting for Dad to come to the car. And I looked at my mother and I apologized again. And I said, Mom, I'm really sorry I brought that up. I didn't mean to make Dad so mad. And the whole restaurant heard him, erupt. And Mom just looked at me and says, "Oh, Gus, don't worry about that. You know, his father said the same thing." His father said the same thing. So what was happening at that moment, I didn't know that.
The dad said the same thing about Pearl Harbor. That
Apparently,
it was a setup.
Same
thing as Stennett.
Yeah, no, my grandfather apparently had the same or a similar view of what had happened to Stennett, and all I was doing was accidentally repeating what my grandfather had said.
Your grandfather didn't need to read Stennett's book to know that.
No, apparently he didn't. No, apparently he didn't. But I did. And so, now, you know, this is a very personal story. And I'll tell you an even more personal story. Because a month before my father died, his caregiver and her boyfriend went to Pearl Harbor. And they saw the USS Arizona Memorial. And I'm talking with the caregiver about her trip to Hawaii and how it went, and she talked about all this stuff. And my dad, this is at the breakfast table, my dad leaned up to me and said, "We pulled Japan into that, didn't we?" Very, very quietly, very, very serenely. This would have been about 7 years or 8 years after that incident in the restaurant. And I very sheepishly and quietly said to my father, "Well, Dad, yeah, the best historians seem to say so." And that's where we left it.
But what's the significance of that?
Repentance.
But what's the...
No, he was recognizing finally in this last month of his life publicly to me that his father was right.
Right. And the relevance of this immediately to the Iran crisis is that in the project, I forgot some project, it said we need a new Pearl Harbor. What was that?
Oh, that's called PNAC, or the Project for the New American Century. That was a position paper that came out, I believe, in 1996, and it was signed on by a lot of government people and leaders, and some of them known to be
some of them were neocons too.
Neoconservatives, yes.
Right, because the similarity between Pearl Harbor and 9/11, because the same thing happened. I had a cousin about 5 years older than me when he was a sophomore, because our uncle was at Pearl Harbor. He was a captain of a ship at Pearl Harbor. Just happened to be. He went to Annapolis, common uncle, wrote his research paper at a private school as a sophomore, turned it in and said, Roosevelt set it up. So anybody, if they wanted, could have done high school research and discovered. You didn't need to read Stennett's book.
Well, I did.
Right. But your grandfather, just by smelling the air, knew this thing was a setup. And my cousin does a high school research paper on Pearl Harbor because of our common uncle, turns it in and said that was a setup by Roosevelt. It's like 9/11. Anybody that wants to can take a little time out and research 9/11 on the internet and YouTube. And if they're honest, they're going to know the official story is a lie. And our policy in Iran, or in the Middle East, is based on the official story of 9/11. Probably 90% of it. So it's based on a lie, plain and simple. I mean, it's just so obvious a lie. Why do we have to hem and haw about it? It's a lie. Who would say it's not a lie? That's honest.
Well, most of my friends don't think it's a lie.
Well, they wouldn't stand 5 minutes at a real table.
Well,
at a real table with real people, they wouldn't last 5 minutes. They'd have to walk away in shame, because 1 + 1 is 2.
Okay.
And they'd have to come up with another argument.
Okay.
Well, isn't So, but we're dealing with America's response. Our response is the title to Iran crisis, which goes back to World War I. There's a World War II connection also, but there's also the phenomena of the government lying.
Yeah, Yeah. Now I do have another story about Iran. I don't know if it's, but the Iran, of course, was taken over after Mossadegh by an American. They considered him a kind of an American puppet.
The Shah?
The Shah of Iran. And when I was in high school, they repaired the Shah of Iran's private jet airplane at Kimberly-Clark Aviation in Appleton. And I had the privilege, because I knew the guy who ran that company, to go over and see the inside of his airplane.
Really? I didn't know.
And he had gold, the seatbelt buckles were gold.
Kind of like Trump?
I guess so. Whatever.
I
don't know. I don't know anything about Trump and his airplanes, but
Okay.
but the issue was I got to see this, and it was just an interesting fact. And in fact, when one of my science teachers at the high school, the Catholic high school, finding out that I was going to go see this airplane, begged me to go along, and I said, "Sure. Well, of course, you're my teacher. You know, whatever you want to do, I'll help you out." Right? I had good relationships with my teachers. And so he went. I'll never forget him looking at that airplane with all the gold in it. It was just.
Was it a jet or an airplane?
It was a small jet, like
Yeah.
like a corporate jet, only a little bit bigger than your ordinary corporate jet.
And what year was this?
That would have been 1974.
Okay, so he ruled from 53?
Yeah, well, sometime after 53 when they put him in till 79.
In the
and then-
revolution.
Yeah,
So he was
78,
there-
79, he was sick, and Carter let him come into the country to be treated for his cancer and all that. That was part of it. I mean, I don't have the dates exactly, but yeah, he reigned until about 78, 79, somewhere in there. And then, of course, the Ayatollahs took over, the rule of their guardians, you know.
Yeah.
But from there, and then you had the kidnapping crisis of the embassy and all that, and then you had the tragic war between Iraq and Iran with Saddam Hussein. You know, that was like a stalemate.
Right. Now, my brother-in-law divorced
Right.
my stepsister, but he married a girl from Iran. I think it was Baha'i.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so they don't like Iran,
Okay.
kind of, right?
Well, the Baha'i were very persecuted, weren't they?
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, there's some people in Iran didn't like the revolution, right?
Oh, sure. I mean, every situation of change in regime is going to have people that don't like it and people that do, right? I mean, that's just universal.
Okay, so you got Thomas Merton here. What are we looking at as far as achieving peace? And can you just summarize what the problem is a little bit, and how we need, the sons of God as peacemakers intervening?
There's components here. Now, Merton starts his account of peace by urging people to develop a believing heart, a peaceful soul. And I mean, even and he recognizes that war begins with self-hatred and lack of faith. So faith, hope, and love are the remedies to start in the soul, right? I mean, and Merton has some very, very, one of my favorite quotes here, he has this whole thing on, at the end of his thing on peace, he says, instead of loving what you think is peace, love other men and love God above all. And instead of hating the people you think are war makers, hate the appetites and the disorder in your own soul, which are the causes of war. That's just like James, okay? Mm-hmm. That's like a commentary on the book of James there. And it goes on. If you love peace, than hate injustice, hate tyranny, hate greed, but hate these things in yourself and not in another. And I would add something to what Tom Merton is saying there. Hate your capacity to believe lies when you're being told lies. Okay?
Right.
Yeah. See, that's the real trigger. Pope John the 23rd, in his famous essay, Pacem in Terris, I have it here, and I'm not going to take the time, but it's in here. You can read it yourself. One of the things he says is that the right to be properly informed about public events is a basic right. And if a media doesn't tell the truth, it should be set aside or discarded, depending on your translation.
But like the scripture says, they will not be able to endure sound doctrine, Timothy.
Yeah.
So they gather around themselves teachers to suit their itching ears. So in other words, if you listen to Americans talk, they generally bring up, well, I have a right to be happy. It's in our, so it's about the people's right to pursue happiness and be happy. And we know where this goes. In order to do that, they're willing to play with the moral law. If the moral law, this forbids this or requires this, but it impinges on their concept of happiness, the state religion is happiness here. That's our state religion is going to trump that religion. And our right to happiness is the fundamental religion of this country.
Yeah, I do have a story about that. One of my friends has been really researching the peace issue, and one of her relatives said to her, I'm making this very so that people won't be able to trace it, but the relative said to her, I don't want to think about this stuff. I just want to be happy.
This comes out of the majority of Americans.
But we have to admire that person's honesty to the principle you're saying here. They're honest. There's a lot of people that won't take time to suffer through the truths that we need to suffer through to get to peace.
It'd be like somebody will say, well, I have to support my family.
Well, I think that's a big one.
Hold it here. The job you have is immoral. And it's immoral here maybe indirectly, but hold it here. I have a right to be happy. And I have a duty to support my family. So they're going to fudge on the moral law. They're not going to allow the penetrating sharpness of God's word to penetrate and say, oh, that's a violation of God's law there. That's a violation there. Nah, that's trumped by my right to be happy. And that's trumped by my pursuit of happiness. It's going to have to take a back seat. And the pursuit of happiness and the accumulation of wealth kind of go together. And this is the American mind.
Well, not all Americans.
No. But we're talking the majority, because majority rules.
Well, we got to pray, because then we want people to repent. Because without truth, we're never going to get to peace. That's at least my. It's a very simple point, but it was taught to me by a very wise man. He was the most. He was considered the most heroic paper executive during the Depression in Appleton, and he was long retired. He was in his 80s, and he and I used to take walks around the city and talk. And at one point, I was talking to him about justice. I was all upset about some social justice issue, which, those things cross my conscience all the time. And he very serenely looked at me and he said, remember, it's like a courtroom. He says, if you really want to figure out what justice is, you've got to get to the truth first. And then you can mete out justice. Like a courtroom, he said. He says, oh, you're right. I mean, based on my theology class, prudence is the queen of the four cardinal virtues. It's the driving one.
But in a postmodern world, in a post-Christian world, truth doesn't really have that much meaning. You almost have to say you have to come to Christ to get to the truth. Because you have a world out here playing with truth, and they're playing games with you. You know, they don't. It's hard to define what an individual in America perceives to be truth. They can play games.
I can't disagree with that, but I think there's the longing for God that's natural to every human being, and there's a longing for truth that's natural to every human intellect.
Okay. But what's the connection between the longing for God and the longing for eternal life? What's the connection? Because for Paul, St. Paul, if by any means I may attain to the resurrection of life. So you would think it's innate in everybody to want to die and not exist.
No. It doesn't work that way. The glory of God is man fully alive, St. Irenaeus. So what's really going on is that as you desire God, you're actually ennobling all the things that have been created in you, in your humanity. Absolutely.
But see, where does this fit in, with Daniel Webster and the famous court case, Gerhard Will case, 1844, that the purpose, what holds a court together is the truth, and what maintains truth in the courtroom
is the integrity of the oaths. Right?
Yes. Well, its bottom line is the fear of going to hell for lying. It's very practical stuff. So if you don't believe you're going to go to hell for lying, then you're disfranchised. Your testimony's invalid. We can't trust you. That's the whole point of Webster's argument. See, so this is very practical stuff. So if we have people in our government, this is why the religious oath is important. If you have people in the government that don't believe they're going to go to hell if they lie, and they are, there's no doubt they're going to go to hell for lying. But they don't believe it. You cannot have those people around. You can't have them on a witness stand. You can't have them in the government. But if you allow people in the government that will lie because they don't think they're going to go to hell, you got chaos. How can you tell if somebody's lying or not? Does anybody believe our government? Does anybody in the world believe our government that has sense? Is there any U.S. citizen that has sense to believe our government? No. You know that. So what kind of dilemma are we in?
A deep dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing that can cure it is to acknowledge the blind spot. There's a wonderful book that I recommend to everybody by Dorothy Ranahan. It's called Blind Spot, War and Christian Identity. And what she's proposing is that we need to be healed of our blind spot when it comes to war.
But is the blind spot our own self-delusion?
Well, heck, I guess sometimes it is. And sometimes it's not necessarily our own self-delusion. It's socially engineered delusion. They may
when they socially engineer us, it takes two to tangle. We want to be socially engineered. Who's kidding who?
Well, there's a mystery to that, isn't there? It's a mystery of freedom and intellect there that is very hard to sort out. That would require you have a psychologist on here to help you with that. But blind spot, I mean, we really do need to be healed of our blind spot. And I just want to point out that I am very skeptical of the reports about the Gulf of Oman incident that has just occurred. This show is on Tuesday, is it the 18th?
Today's the 18th.
Yeah, on the 13th, 5 days ago, there was that incident with the tankers.
Right, and no reasonable person is going to trust what the government's saying about that. They may be telling the truth, but there's not enough truth there or confidence in their truthability to trust what they're saying.
Yeah,
that's
what's
that's
very
what I'm trying to
interesting
say.
is that one of the big Twitter, you know how they have these Twitter feeds that are the top ones? Gulf of Tonkin has come up big on the Twitter feeds. So everybody's thinking Gulf of Tonkin when they look at Gulf of Oman. And of course, we now know that the Gulf of Tonkin incident was completely fabricated
Is
to
there
pull
anything
us
that...
into the Vietnam theater.
Right.
And can you imagine that?
Have we ever had a war where we weren't lied to? Do you know of one war we weren't lied to about?
Well, Winston Churchill said it. During wartime, you got to preserve the truth with an army of lies around it. And Mr. Bolton, Brother John Bolton, who's our national security advisor of some kind
He's
for
up
Trump.
there. He's up there.
Something up there. He said that he would lie for national security. He said
Well, hold
that.
it here. Hold it
He
here.
said he would lie.
Hold it here. Didn't even Immanuel Kant say that the ends does not justify the means? Okay.
Right.
So 3 times in the book of Revelation, at the end, it basically says 3 times all liars are going to hell. Now, if you were working for the government and they paid you to lie, can a Christian do that? They're going to say it's in the name of defense, national security. In order to fight a war, you have to lie. What would a Christian do? He's in the military, he's fighting for the government, he's trying to defeat some evil entity. Are you allowed to lie to win that war as a Christian? Apparently, we don't wrestle with this stuff much, do we? Because
we
every
don't.
Christian that goes into fights for the United States will lie in a second. That's the impression I get. In the name of national security.
Oh, right. And there's even that famous memorandum or whatever in 1948 that linked assassinations in other countries to what they called plausible deniability, which meant that you could pull these things off as long as the chain of command got fuzzy and people could kind of say, yeah, we didn't know, that kind of thing.
They're lying.
They could, yeah. I mean, that whole plausible deniability thing crept into the National Security Act, I believe, in 47 or 48.
Well, how about the pastors of the churches that are having these churches of any kind who are sending their sons to war, and they become officers, they become CIA?
Well,
what are they instructing them? You can't lie, right?
Well, I hope they're telling them not to lie.
No, they never do.
Well, in the CIA,
No, they never
in
do.
their office, they have the truth will make you free, right? You'll know the truth, and the truth will make you free.
George Orwell.
I see. Okay.
I'm just saying the church is weak. They're not insisting on upholding the Word of God, the moral order of things, true wisdom, as we're reading in James.
Yeah.
The wisdom that comes from below is devilish, it says. What kind of wisdom is our government operating on? So when they're instigating this incident, Pompeo is saying, oh, no, we got the evidence. You know, of course, the photographs are so fuzzy, you're kind of going, don't you have any better cameras? I mean, this looks like a camera out of a Cracker Jack box. I mean, what's the deal? And Pompeo is a radical Christian Zionist and became one supposedly while he was in the military.
Okay.
So this is all about Armageddon and the rapture for these guys.
And I would propose that we ought to listen to prophets like Thomas Merton, Pope John, Saint Pope John the 23rd, Saint Pope John Paul II, Dorothy Day, John Donne.
Well, hold it here.
Martin Luther King. Those people.
You're presenting a Catholic supersessionist replacement theology position vis-a-vis Christian Zionism.
Oh, I'm
I'm proposing.
proposing.
Are those two positions still historically and even now? Is that where part of the war is? Is that where part of the battle here is?
The battle is definitely here. I've been on your show talking with Mike Vellner. Matt Eby has been on your show talking to Mike Vellner, a Christian Zionist. I remember when I first brought up Christian Zionism, I told you, bring a Christian Zionist on the show and let me talk to him. And I'm still interested in that. I'm still interested in dialogue with all points of view, circles of humanity. Let the neoconservatives come and let's talk. Let the Christian Zionists come. Let's talk. Let's work this out according to speech and freedom of speech. Let's not shut speech down. There's a lot of shutting peace speech down happening right now in our country.
What's better, having the discussion take place on YouTube or having the discussion take place locally?
I'd start local, and then you can move it to YouTube. I absolutely think local first.
So if you're not having a local discussion, you got Notre Dame, you got Bethel, you got IUSB, you got, okay, that could be more important than a YouTube discussion.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm sponsoring a local discussion at St. Bavo's in July, on the Mondays and Wednesdays of July, with the exception of July 24th. But I'm giving 7 talks. It's called Lunch and Learn. People can come in, bring their lunch, eat, listen to the talk, and I'll have them out of there by 12:45 so they can get back to work.
45 minutes?
A half an hour talk.
Okay.
So 15 minutes to get settled in, start eating, then listen to the talk, and then those who have to leave can leave, and those who want to stay and discuss for questions and answers can stay, but it's open. And the title is The 7 Witnesses to Peace, but I have a friend correcting me. He said, why don't you call them witnesses to mercy first? Because obviously you've got to go through mercy to peace. They are both merciful and peaceful people.
So you're talking mercy involves forgiveness? Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Right. You got to have mercy to get to peace. And you got to have truth to get to peace. There's no doubt about it. We want to listen to the 7 witnesses to peace to cure our blind spot.
But one, you're saying if you have local communities,
yes,
iron sharpening iron,
right,
working these things out, that can have a domino effect.
Well, sure, because we are rational creatures, Aristotle taught us, right? So we're going to use our reason, and we're going to come to truth, and we're going to share truth with each other. That's the whole purpose of...
But they say basically that this is an unsolvable problem. Isn't that what they say?
They claim that it's inevitable. They got the laundry list. You can see it on YouTube. The laundry list of the countries that were going to be invaded after 9/11. You hear General Wesley Clark telling that Miss Goodman on public TV that these 7 countries, and they list the countries, and the last one down is Iran.
Oh, they're the last one?
Yeah, you can watch that. Watch Wesley Clark. Just Google it on YouTube and watch him.
Well, who do you think is winning? Who are the sides? Is it because Pompeo and Reagan? I'm reading the history of Reagan. Russia, it's Gog and Magog. They got it all down. Okay, Russia and Iran are going to team up. But what are the nations? Who's against who here? How does this thing boil down?
I mean, it boils down for me between the people who want to push a war agenda for whatever reason, some ideological and some for oil, I guess, and or hegemony over the petrodollar is another reason I've heard. Whatever, I'm not sure. I'm not an expert on geopolitics, but I do know that you can either solve these things by violence and by the sin of preemptive war, for example, or war you lie about, and it ends up being preemptive because you lied.
Okay, so the Iraq War...
That's one way, or you can solve it by negotiation and building trust.
But
That's what
but
John the 23rd argued in Pachman Terrace.
But the initial war, Iraq, you were in favor of it, right? And weren't 90% of Americans in favor of it?
I was fooled, I admit. I was one of the 90% of the Americans that got caught into that, and I regret it.
So this is
I
like
think
Gerald
about-
and I come back again. In other words,
Yeah,
the American first regretted World War I.
Forgive me, Gerald, I screwed up bad. Forgive me, Dad, I screwed up bad on that one. I did.
Okay.
I'm a catechist in the Catholic Church, and I didn't get it right. I should have gotten it right like that.
Had you been,
I was fooled. I was foolish.
and your training should have caught you. Should have.
And my family background too. I should have made these connections, but I was too busy worrying about other things. I admit that. I was pursuing happiness, like a good American.
There you go.
God forgive me. No, but now I'm ready to examine these things much more carefully.
Okay, when's the? We got 2 minutes. When's the first talk at St. Babel's?
The first talk at St. Babel's is at noon at the Parish Center on July 6th.
July 6th.
And then the next one's July 8th, and then so
And we're
on.
gonna-
Mondays and Wednesdays.
And you're going to try to film them so they can go on YouTube?
I'm going to try to film them if certain friends of mine will help me, Peter. But we'll see how that goes. But the issue is they're welcome. They can come. And I welcome people with different views. I am not afraid of different views. I'm just not.
No. Well,
In fact, I think they can enrich the discussion.
well, Joe Bach, we had the guy who ran for Jackie Lorcy's position, said
Right.
the only thing that moves anything is a co-religionist, because most people have a religious position.
Right.
You have to go alongside them, look at the scriptures they're studying, and discuss where they're coming from.
Right. And we want to do that out of respect for people. Absolutely.
Okay. Okay, well, this winds it up. This is Peter Helland on Citizens for Community Media. This is local, and of course we put it on YouTube. But I think Gus is right. I think if you can get a local conversation going, it's even more effective than just putting it up on YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and hopefully this will encourage people that see it on YouTube to try to get a local conversation going. We haven't been that successful, not as near as successful as we want, okay, but we're still pushing that. So hopefully you'll have success on these 7 talks at St. Babel's Church in Mishawaka.
Thank you.
Okay. Till next time on Citizens for Community Media.